Hello and welcome to the next session of photosynthesis in higher plants. So, in this session we are using some technology by which let us represent the process of photosynthesis. Now, regarding the process of photosynthesis, as you have studied in the earlier part also, regarding the process of photosynthesis, how exactly the photosynthesis occurs, where exactly the process of photosynthesis occurs, and the mechanism of the photosynthesis, what is the purpose of photosynthesis in the plants, and finally what we are going to get. The final product is the food which is produced in the green plants, and that is required for all the living organisms. So, that is why food has to be produced in presence of the sunlight, and hence here we come across the dark reactions as well as the light reactions. So, the PPT that you are seeing now, this is regarding the part of the absorption as well as the action spectra, which was proposed by T.W. Engelmann, where we also call it as the T.W. Engelmann's absorption as well as action spectra of light. Then later on we came across the light harvesting complexes also, where we call it as a LSC, and it comes under the process of the light reactions, which already you have studied about these parts. Okay. So, where the light reactions also called as the photochemical phase. Why it is called as a photochemical phase? Photo means light. During in presence of the light, with the use of some chemicals, how the organic compounds are synthesized. Okay. So, here this phase directly depends on the light. The pigment absorb light energy and produce ADP. That includes all of this: light absorption by the plants, splitting up of water, where we call it as a water splitting, oxygen release, formation of ATP and NADPH, which we have studied in our previous session, how energy is produced during non-cyclic photophosphorylations. Okay. Then here in this, let us go to the photophosphorylation. Photophosphorylation, as we have discussed yesterday, photo means light, phosphorylation is nothing but production of energy. Either it is in the form of ATP or either it is in the form of a NADPH. So, irrespective of that, so during the process of a photophosphorylation, energy is produced. So, energy has to be produced because the process is taking place in the chloroplast. When the process takes place in the chloroplast, then the food has to be produced inside the chloroplast initially. Okay. So, later on the storage points are different. Okay. Now, here the process of formation of ATP in chloroplast in presence of sunlight is said to be photophosphorylation. So, photophosphorylation is of two types, non-cyclic as well as a cyclic type. Okay. So, already we have discussed regarding the non-cyclic photophosphorylation, what are the ingredients needed for this recipe. So, we discussed all these things in the previous session also. The same thing has been represented here in the form of statements. Now, PS2 absorbs a 680 nanometer wavelength of a red light. Okay. So, the Webber spectra 680 nanometer. So, it represents a red spectra of light, then causing electrons to become excited, and these electrons are then accepted by an electron acceptor, which sends them to an electron transport system, where we call it as a downhill. First uphill transport, later on it is a downhill transport. Okay. Then electron transport system transfers electrons to photosystem 1. So, which already we know. Okay. Then electrons in PS1 bandaga, then again it gets excited. Then it gets simultaneously excited on receiving a wavelength of 700 nanometer light. That means light has to fall on the reaction center of photosystem 1 as well as on the reaction center of photosystem 2. So, on both the cases. Okay. Then from the electron acceptor, electrons are transferred to the molecule of NADP plus, which is converted into NADPH plus H plus finally. So, addition of these electrons reduce the NADP plus to NADPH plus H plus, which is also termed to be NADPH2 antunu kariತೀವಿ. Since the electrons lost by PS2 do not come back, once if the electrons are excited, once if the electrons flow, once if the electrons move, the electrons are not returned back. If the electrons are not returned back, then such type of the electron transport system is said to be non-cyclic electron transport system. Okay. ATP is called non-cyclic photophosphorylation. That means ATP is produced in the non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Along with that, even NADPH2 is also produced. So, this is the basics based on the diagrammatic representation, where we call it as the schematic representation. Okay. Now, here we have the scheme. So, this is the diagram of the chloroplast. So, where it shows the light reactions occurs here. Along with that, the dark reaction is represented by a Kelvin cycle. ಅಂದರೆ ಎರಡು ಕ್ಲೋರೋಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ನಾಗ ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಾದ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಕೆಲ್ವಿನ್ ಸೈಕಲ್ ಇದೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಫುಡ್ ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಮೆಕ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್. ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ಸೈಕಲ್ ವಿಚ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಇಟ್. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಕೆಲ್ವಿನ್ ಸೈಕಲ್ ಆಕರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಾ ವೈಲ್ ದ ಲೈಟ್ ರಿಯಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಆಕರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಮೆಂಬ್ರೇನ್ ಆಫ್ ಥೈಲಾಕಾಯ್ಡ್, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗುವಂಥವು. ಸೊ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ನೋ ದ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸ್. ಇದು ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಇರಲಿ. ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದಿಸ್ Kelvin cycle? Okay, so let's study that Kelvin cycle in detail. Okay, we have an elaborate account of these also, but for the process of the Kelvin cycle, if Kelvin cycle has to take place, then definitely the light reaction has to occur. Okay, now what exactly happens here? Illi ಏನು ಆಗ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು. Now here, when the light energy reaches, when light reaches to the photosystem 2, it is having a reaction center called as a P680. So, what we have discussed yesterday, here we are representing in the diagrammatic form with some additional parts. Okay, so yesterday we have came across the part of the NCLT, and now we are looking at the part of the major compounds, intermediate compounds, okay, that we come across. Now, when light falls, then there is a splitting of water, where we also call it as a photolysis of water. So, let us study that heading later. ಅದನ್ನು ಆ ನಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತೀವಿ. Water gets splitted, H2 gets broken down to release 2 electrons, 2 protons and 1 nascent oxygen. Okay, that means we also call it as half O2 ಅಂತಲೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಹಾಗಿದ್ರೆ ಆಕ್ಸಿಜನ್ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ವಾಟರ್ ಮಾಲಿಕ್ಯೂಲ್ಸ್ ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ಡೌನ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು? 2 water molecule has to be broken down. Then the electrons which are released, it reaches the reaction center of PS2, it gets photo excited, then electrons are transported to the primary acceptor. And if we come to the primary acceptor there, the primary acceptor here, this is called to be PHE. We call it as a PO-phytin. So, PHE is a PO-phytin. Now, here we have a compound. The primary acceptor is a PO-phytin and ಕರೀತೀವಿ. So, this is the additional NCLT bit to additional now we'll discussion ಮಾಡಕತ್ತೀವಿ. Okay. So, PO-phytin is there. Then, when the electrons are accepted by this PO-phytin, then in the downhill process, ಈ downhill process ಒಳಗಡೆ ನಮಗಿರುವಂಥವು ಏನೇನು? So, here PQA, PQB ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಕೆಲವೊಂದು intermediate compounds ಬರುವಂಥದ್ದು, which is there in your neat material. You can just go through that. PQA, PQB, then cytochrome B and F complex, then comes the PC. Then what is the meaning of this? You will intermediate compounds all together, what they do, they help in transport of the electrons. ಒಂದರಿಂದ ಒಂದು ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾವೆ. ಇದು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ಸಪೋಸ್ ಲೆಟ್ ಮಿ ಟೇಕ್ ಎ ಬಾಲ್. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು 10 ಜನ ನಿಂತಾರಂತ ಅನ್ಕೊನು. Let us call that ball as a electron. Now, what I do is, if I am the reaction center of photosystem 2, I just throw the ball to one person. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ನಿಂತಿರ್ತಾನ, ಅವನ್ನ ಥ್ರೋ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. What he does, he just catches the ball. Then what he does, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು 10 ಜನ ನಿಂತಾರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಈ ಬಾಲ್ ಪಾಸ್ ಆನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊತ ಹೋಗೋದು. This is what is called as a electron transport. ಇದೊಂದು ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇದೆ, ಇದೇ ಮೆಥಡ್ಲೆ ಫ್ಲೋ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಫ್ಲೋ ಆಗ್ತಾವೆ. ಬಟ್ ಈ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಫ್ಲೋ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಏನಾಗ್ತದ, ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಫ್ರಾಮ್ ದ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಬ್ಸಾರ್ಬ್ಡ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫೈನಲಿ ದ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಈಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆಫ್ ATP ಆಸ್ ವೆಲ್ ಆಸ್ NADPH. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಓಕೆ, ನಾವು ಹಿಯರ್ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಒನ್ ಕಮ್ಸ್ ಅ PO-phytin, ದೆನ್ ಕಮ್ಸ್ ಅ PQ. ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟೋಕ್ವಿನೋನ್. PQ is plastoquinone. It is a compound. The electrons from the PO-phytin, where we call it as a primary acceptor of electrons, are transferred to PO-phytin. plastoquinone. From here plastoquinone A, plastoquinone B ಅಂತನೂ ಇರ್ತಾವ. Let us call it as simply plastoquinone. From here it is transferred to cytochrome complex, cytochrome B and F complex ಅಂತನೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. Now look at the electron transport there. ಅಲ್ಲಿ electron transport ಹೆಂಗದ? Now here this cytochrome complex ಇದಕ್ಕೆ cytochrome B bar F complex ಅಂತನೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ cytochrome B6 complex, cytochrome F complex ಅಂತ ಇರ್ತಾವಲ್ಲಿ. During this process here what happens? Electron flow provides energy for chemiosmotic synthesis. That means here what is produced? ATP is produced from ADP plus IP. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗ್ತತಿ. ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ತೋರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ, ಬಟ್ ಇದು ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕೆಮಿ ಆಸ್ಮೋಸಿಸ್ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ತದೆ. ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ ATP ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಂಥಸೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ, ಬಟ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ATP ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಬೈ ದ ನಾನ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಹಿಯರ್ ATP ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತದೆ. ನಾವು ಹಿಯರ್ ದೆರ್ ಇಸ್ ಎ ಸಿಂಬಾಲ್ ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ಗಿವನ್. ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ flow provides energy for chemi-osmotic synthesis of ATP. ATP ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತದೆ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಕೊಟ್ಟಾರು. So here ATP gets synthesized. Okay, that ATP is released into the stroma only. Then electron comes to PC. PC is plastocyanin. This PC is plastocyanin. Then electron will move towards the photosystem 1, reaction center of photosystem 1. Illu light bildada, illu sunlight bidirada, and it receives the wavelength of 700 nanometer of light. Then again it gets excited and it donates the electron to the primary acceptor, and there what we have is a primary acceptor is, we call it as a A0 A1 F complex. ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ನಾವು A0 A1 ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಾಂಪ್ಲೆಕ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಬರ್ತಾವ. ದೇ ಆರ್ ಅನ್ನೋನ್ ಕಾಂಪ್ಲೆಕ್ಸಸ್, ಅನ್ನೋನ್ ಕಾಂಪೌಂಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂತಲೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಥ್ರೂ ದೋಸ್ ಕಾಂಪೌಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟೆಡ್ ಟು ದ FD. FD ಈಸ್ ಅ ಫೆರಡಾಕ್ಸಿನ್. Then these electrons are transported to NADP plus, where NADP gets reduced. Reduction ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ಅಡಿಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಹೈಡ್ರೋಜನ್. ಆಕ್ಸಿಡೇಷನ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ರಿಮೂವಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಹೈಡ್ರೋಜನ್. ಹೈಡ್ರೋಜನ್ ತೆಗೆದಂಗೆ ರಿಮೂವ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಆಕ್ಸಿಡೇಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಹೈಡ್ರೋಜನ್ ಆ್ಯಡ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ರಿಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ NADP ಪ್ಲಸ್ ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ರಿಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಟು NADP ಪ್ಲಸ್ ಪ್ಲಸ್ H ಪ್ಲಸ್, ರೈಟ್, ಆರ್ ಎಲ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಎಸ್ NADPH2 ಅಂತಲೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ ನಾವು. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಕನ್ವರ್ಟ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ನಾವು ಹಿಯರ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಅನ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್. ಇದೊಂದು ಎಂಜೈಮ್ ಬೇಕತ್ತಿ. ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್ ಈಸ್ ಎ NADP ರಿಡಕ್ಟೇಸ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್. ಟು ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ NADPH2 ವಿ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ ಎನ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್. ದಿಸ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್ ಈಸ್ NADP ರಿಡಕ್ಟೇಸ್ ಎಂಜೈಮ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ದ ಫೈನಲಿ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ accepted by this NADP plus, combines with 2H plus, finally forms into NADPH plus H plus. So 1 NADPH2 is equal to how many ATP? It is equivalent to 3 ATP. ಅದು 3 ATP ದಷ್ಟು equivalent ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಅಷ್ಟು ಎನರ್ಜಿ ರಿಚ್ ಕಾಂಪೌಂಡ್ ಅದು, ರೈಟ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ we know what is NADPH. NADPH is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ರಿಗಾರ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ದ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ non-cyclic photophosphorylation. So which we have already studied with an additional content. We are studying it. Okay, so let us go to the next one. The next part that we are going to study is regarding the cyclic photophosphorylation. Now in the non-cyclic photophosphorylation, the electrons are not returned back. In non-cyclic, the electrons are not returned back. That's why we say it as a non-cyclic photophosphorylation. While in case of the cyclic photophosphorylation, the electrons are returned back to the reaction center. One more thing, in plants, generally non-cyclic photophosphorylation will occur. Non-cyclic ಆಗೋದು ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ಟೈಮ್, ನಾರ್ಮಲಿ ಆಗೋದು non-cyclic photophosphorylation. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅದರಿಂದ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡೋದೈತಿ ಮುಂದೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತದೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತಾವೆ ಅಂತಲೂ ಅಂತದ. ಓಕೆ, ಯಾಕೆ ಫುಡ್ ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ಪುಟ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ, ಅದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಇವು ಲೈಟ್ ರಿಯಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಎನರ್ಜಿ ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ನಾವು ಇನ್ ದ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಫೋಟೋಫಾಸ್ಫೊರಿಲೇಷನ್ ಹಿಯರ್ ಫೋಟೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ 1 ಈಸ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ವಾಲ್ವ್ಡ್. ಫೋಟೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ 1 ಒಂದೇ ಇನ್ವಾಲ್ವ್ ಆಗ್ಯದ, ಫೋಟೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ 2 ಇದ್ರಾಗ ಇನ್ವಾಲ್ವ್ ಆಗಿರಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. Non-cyclic photophosphorylation occurs in the membrane of the thylakoid, and cyclic photophosphorylation it occurs in the stromal lamellae. Stromal lamellae ಒಳಗಡೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. Now what exactly happens? Now here in this part, in this scheme only PS1 is functional. That means photosystem 1 ಒಂದ functional ಇರ್ತದೆ. PS1 photosystem 1 is functional, hence the electrons are circulated within the photosystem. ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಸರ್ಕ್ಯುಲೇಟ್ ಹಾಕೊಂತ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. That's why the name what? Cyclic. This results in a cyclic flow of the electrons. This scheme could possibly be occurring in stroma lamellae. This is most important. This will be asked for an objective. Where does the cyclic photophosphorylation occurs in the plants ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದಾಗ ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಾ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆ ಆರ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಲ್ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆದಾಗ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಲ್ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಗ್ರಾನಮ್ದಿಂದ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಗ್ರಾನಮ್ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗುವಂಥದ್ದು ಪ್ಯಾಸೇಜ್, ಅದು ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಾ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಬೋತ್ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಲ್ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಫೋಟೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ 1 ಮಾತ್ರ ಇರ್ತಾವೆ, ಫೋಟೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ 2 ರಿಯಾಕ್ಷನ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಇರಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. ದೆನ್ PS2 and NADP plus reductase enzymes, they are also present in the cyclic photophosphorylation. Then this cyclic flow results only in the synthesis of ATP and not of NADP H plus H plus. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ATP ಒಂದೇ ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತದ, while NADP H plus H plus is not synthesized in this process. ಇದು synthesize ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. Okay, because both of them are produced in non-cyclic, and in cyclic only ATP is produced. So how? Let's look at the cycle. Okay, now if we look at the structure in the non-cyclic photophosphorylation, we have only photosystem 1, PS1. So let's see here what exactly happens. Now here in the photosystem 1 we have the LHC, light harvesting complex. Now this light harvesting complex, photosystem 1, it is having a reaction center P700. When light falls on this photosystem, the energy moves, that means a particular wavelength of light moves from one to other molecule and finally it reaches the reaction center called as P700. So it has the chlorophyll A molecule. Then there is generation of electrons, and these electrons will move from its lower energy level state to its higher energy level state. Then after that, when the electrons jump, electrons yavag jump agtava, here we have the primary acceptor where it receives the electrons. Then these electrons will move downhill process through various substances called as FD, ferredoxin. Then it comes to cytochrome B and F complex. Then it comes to plastocyanin, and the electrons are returned back. Now during this process, here what is produced? ADP plus inorganic phosphate. It absorbs the energy from the electrons and converts it into ATP. Look at this. So finally it converts into ATP. So energy is produced. So look into your NCERT books. ನಿಮ್ಮ NCERT book ಒಳಗಡೆ ನೋಡ್ರಿ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತದ. So forget about the rest part. ಇದು ಬೇರೆ part ಬಿಡ್ರಿ. Cyclic photophosphorylation diagram ನೋಡ್ರಿ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನದ. So here light falls on the reaction center of photosystem 1 having P700. This is reaction center. Then electrons, they are produced, the reaction center gets excited, the electrons are donated to the primary acceptor. ಇಲ್ಲಿ NCERT ಒಳಗಡೆ FD ಅಂತಿಲ್ಲ. Now here we have electron transport system ಅಂತ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟಾರ, ETS. They have written it as a ETS, electron transport system. ಯಾಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಈ intermediate compounds ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಫ್ಲೋ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. Then the electrons, the energy from the electron is absorbed by ADP combines with an inorganic phosphate and finally forms into ATP. ATP synthesize ಆಗ್ತದೆ. So look into your textbook NCERT and then listen to the video. You will understand it better. Okay. So here energy is produced. Here what we say, energy for chemiosmotic synthesis of ATP. ಅಂದರೆ ಇದರಿಂದ ಇದು ಕೆಮಿಯಾಸ್ಮಸ್ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಹೋಗಿ ATP ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ಹಿಯರ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಇಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆಫ್ ATP. ATP ತಯಾರಾಯಿತು, ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್, ದೆನ್ ಇಟ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಗೋಸ್ ದ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಕ್ಸೈಟೇಷನ್. ಇದು ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ನಾವು ದಿಸ್ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಈಸ್ ವೆರಿ ರೇರ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ಸ್. ಈ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ಸಾಗ ಆಗೋದು ಭಾಳ ಕಡಿಮೆ, ನಾನ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಆಗೋದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ದಿಂದ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಭಾಳಷ್ಟು ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ನಾನ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ದಿಂದ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಭಾಳ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ನಾಗ ಒಂದು NADPH ಆಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ATP ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತಾವೆ, ವಿಚ್ ಈಸ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು ಎಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ 4 ATP ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆದಂಗೆ ಆಯ್ತು. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸೈಕಲಿಂದ ಒಂದೇ ATP ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆದಂಗೆ ಆಯ್ತು. ದ್ಯಾಟ್ಸ್ ವೈ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಈಸ್ ಲೆಸ್. ಇಫ್ ದ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ರಿಸೀವ್ಸ್ ಎ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ವೇವ್ ಲೆಂತ್ ಆಫ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ P700, ದೆನ್ ವಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್, ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಫೋಟೋಫಾಸ್ಫೋರಿಲೇಷನ್ ವಿಲ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್. ನಾನ್ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವಾಗ ಸೈಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಒಂದು ಮಾತ್ರ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ ಇನ್ ದ ಸ್ಟ್ರೋಮಲ್ ಲ್ಯಾಮೆಲ್ಲೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಆಗುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ದೇರ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ better understand here. Everything is same only. Again, when light falls, electrons jump, it enters into intermediate compounds. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳಷ್ಟು ಇಂಟರ್ಮೀಡಿಯೇಟ್ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಂಪೌಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇರುವಂಥವು. If you just look at your neat material, then you find a lot of intermediate compounds here. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಾಗ A0, A1, FX, FAB, Q ಅಂತ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಕಂಪೌಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುವಂಥವು. ಬಟ್ ಮೇಜರ್ಲಿ, now here we are considering majorly. So majorly is a ferredoxin, then it comes to PQ, plastoquinine, cytochrome, B and F complex ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ, then plastocyanin, PC, then the electrons return back. ಆದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ATP ತಯಾರಾಗ್ತದೆ, ATP is produced. ಓಕೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇದು ಲೋವರ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಇದೆ. ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇದು ಹೈಯರ್, ಅಂದರೆ ಜಂಪ್ ಆದಾಗ ಇಟ್ ಎಂಟರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ದ ಹೈಯರ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್. ಓಕೆ, ನಾವು ಲೆಟ್ಸ್ ಮೂವ್ ಟು ದ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ವಿಚ್ ವಿ ಆರ್ ಟಾಕಿಂಗ್ ಯೆಸ್ಟರ್ಡೇ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ಫೋಟೋಲೈಸಿಸ್ ಆಫ್ ವಾಟರ್, ವೇರ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ ಅ ಸ್ಪ್ಲಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ವಾಟರ್. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಫೋಟೋಲೈಸಿಸ್ ಅಂತಲೂ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ ಅ ಸ್ಪ್ಲಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ವಾಟರ್. ಹೌ ವಾಟರ್ ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ಸ್ಪ್ಲಿಟೆಡ್. ನಾವು water splitting complex is associated with a PS2. Now here splitting of water and oxygen evolving complex OEC antanu karitivi. So what it is, let's see here. Now manganese, chlorine etc. play an important role in splitting up of water when light falls on the leaf. Here what exactly happens, the light dependent splitting of water is called as a photolysis. What is photolysis? Splitting up of water in presence of sunlight is called as a what? Photolysis ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. Now here 2 molecules of H2 are broken down to release 4 protons, 1 molecule of oxygen and 4 electrons. So this is the exact process which occurs during photolysis of water, splitting of water. Ida process ಆಗ್ತದೆ. This will be asked for a 2 mark level question. Explain the splitting of water. Splitting of water is also called as a photolysis of water, where there is breakdown of water in presence of sunlight, where 2 molecules of water are broken down to produce 4 molecules of protons, 4 molecules of electrons and 1 molecule of oxygen. Electrons are picked up by the reaction center for the electron transport system. Then what happens to the protons? Protons, they remain in the lumen of the thylakoid. Thylakoid center ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು lumen ಒಳಗಡೆ ಉಳಿತಾವ. Then oxygen which is released, it comes out from the plant through the stomata. Stomata ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. Okay. Then electrons formed are used for replacing the electrons lost from P680. Reaction center 2 ಹೋಗ್ತದೆ, ಇವು ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾವಂತ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್, ಆ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು. P680 absorbs light and becomes as a strong oxidizing agent and splits a molecule of water to release oxygen. Oxygen is liberated and oxygen is the byproduct of photosynthesis. Remember, which is the byproduct of photosynthesis? Oxygen is the byproduct. But ನೋಡ್ರಿ, oxygen byproduct ಅವಕ್ಕೆ ಎದುರಿಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೆ ಸರ್ವೈವಲ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಓಕೆ, then protons are used for the formation of reducing powers NADP plus to NADP H plus H plus ಹಾಗೆ ಕನ್ವರ್ಟ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ರಿಗಾರ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ದ photolysis of water. Then let's look at the difference between cyclic as well as non-cyclic photophosphorylation. ಇವೆರಡರ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ನಾವು ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸ್ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಏನು ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸ್ ನಮಗೆ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತದೆ. ನಾವು non-cyclic photolysis of water takes place. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ವಾಟರ್ ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ಡೌನ್ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ, ಆಕ್ಸಿಜನ್ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ವಾಟರ್ ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ಡೌನ್ ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಆಕ್ಸಿಜನ್ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ ನಾರ್ಮಲಿ ಈ ಪ್ರೊಸೆಸ್ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಗೊತ್ತಾಯಿತು. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ photolysis of water, release of oxygen. Here both photosystem 1 and 2 are involved. There only photosystem 1 is involved. Electrons are not cycled. Electrons are cycled, which already we know. Both ATP and NADPH are produced. ಎರಡು ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾವೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಓನ್ಲಿ ATP is produced as you have saw in the cycle. Oxygen is liberated, then oxygen is not liberated. Okay, so that's regarding the part of the difference between cyclic as well as a non-cyclic photophosphorylation. With these, the next concept is regarding the chemiosmotic model and regarding the process of the chemiosmosis, which was mainly given by Peter Michel. So that part we'll discuss in the next class. Thank you.